So what does America look like at the end? China?
That is the goal of a lot of people at the highest levels of Silicon Valley in our government.
Can I tell you
would
something?
say, look, no, oh, sure.
I have friends who are industrialists, and they would say to me 30 years ago, China's the new model. And I thought, that's a bad model. We don't want that. And they would just flippantly just say, China's the new model. It wasn't until 10 years later that I started going, wait a minute. They mean that sincerely, that how it works there, all of it, is coming here.
Yeah. That's been planned for a long time. We talked about Chinagate earlier. The origins of Silicon Valley are in that whole mix. And a lot of the most powerful people in our military-industrial complex, including like Lockheed Martin, were involved with that and wanted that sensitive technology to go to China. And undermine our national security. There was something going on there then, and I think we're increasingly seeing it now. I wrote an article in 2020 about the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. They basically say that in order to be competitive in artificial intelligence and secure economic and military hegemony for the United States, we have to go beyond China in terms of their implementation of surveillance technology, the use of artificial intelligence, moving away from private car ownership, which they refer to as a legacy system, in-person doctor visits, to the AI-powered alternative. This was in 2019, before COVID. COVID comes along.
2 years before that, I talked to the chairman of the board at General Motors, and he told me by 2030, we won't be making cars as you know them today. We'll be making fleets.
Yeah,
because people
it's
won't
Uber.
be having,
it's Ubers you rent and you can't control where they go,
correct.
And they're only going to be in the smart cities. You're not going between cities anymore. No more road trips. No more, you decide, I want to go over here today. I want to drive 3 hours to see my family or whoever, my friends. That's over if these people win. And the National Security Commission on AI was run by Eric Schmidt, former head of Google. One of the co-chair was a top guy that works closely with Schmidt that was at the Department of Defense. And it's the intelligence community, the military, and Silicon Valley. And those are the people increasingly running the show. And they think if we don't go beyond China's surveillance system, its mega city, smart city model, we will fail. And then you have people like Elon Musk coming in and saying, I want to take over Twitter for free speech. And then he also says, I want to make Twitter into basically like WeChat, which is, basically a surveillance app to use in China. That's for your finances, your social media, pretty much everything is on that app. They even call it the Everything app. And that's his model. And the parent company of that, Tencent, is one of Tesla's shareholders and, most active advisors. So is that data going to stay, that he's going to get from Twitter, the new Twitter, when it becomes a WeChat equivalent? Where's that going to go? I mean, there's a lot. If you look at, the China connection here, it's, when I was before I wrote the book, I didn't realize the extent of the overlap, but it's very concerning. You have people with major conflicts of interest running our national security policy on things like AI that have conflicts of interest with China. And Eric Schmidt just wrote a book with Henry Kissinger, and these guys basically argue in order to avoid a cataclysmic war with China, we have to make good and cooperate with China. And the model for that is basically, the World Economic Forum. I mean, they argue the same thing, global governance and technocracy, following the China model here. And it's very against everything most Americans are accustomed to. But they're, I guess, finding ways to manufacture consent for it, whether the justification's climate change, it's COVID, it's a food and energy crisis that's been manufactured. Whatever will stick, they'll use. But the problem is you're having the people that control Silicon Valley behind this. They control where most people get their information, where most people socialize today. And they're increasingly censoring people from platforms. They're waging basically a war on dissent. That I've written about a few times, and it's getting, increasingly Orwellian to the point where, they'll label you misinformation or, this is disinformation. But, the Biden administration, if their war on domestic terror advances the way they've written it out, you say the wrong thing or you disagree with the state even or the official narrative, you're inciting violence. You're potentially a domestic violent extremist.
Right.
And that's happened in history before, not necessarily in the United States, but other countries. And, it's pretty clear that once that type of policy gets implemented, things go downhill very quickly.
Do you have hope at all that if the Republicans could win, it at least slows it down? I mean, I think people in the Republican, there's clearly people who go to Washington and actually believe it and then are turned, or they go to Washington, they're already a dirtbag and they know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
And then there's a few that go and stand and are trying to hold the line.
But they're a minority.
A big minority.
Or they get forced out.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken, Ron Johnson, right? Was the one that challenged a lot of COVID narratives.
Yes.
And I mean, even mainstream media, NPR, supposed to be objective, says, he spreads conspiracy theories and his challenger's a rising star. And, they're very clear about who they favor and who they don't. And if they don't want you to win, they'll gerrymander your district. They'll do there's lots of tools that they can use to prevent you from staying in office, and who knows what we'll see in the midterm elections. But ultimately, those type of people that are willing to stand their ground and actually fight for the American people are very few. It doesn't really matter what party you're talking about. It's very small number when you consider the amount of votes needed to pass certain legislation. Yeah. So I think ultimately, the way out of this is for the American people to realize that yes, this is a fight between good and evil, but if you're looking for the good guys, stop looking at people that are put on the TV screens in front of you and start looking at your neighbors.
Yeah.
And
the answer is so clear. Local. Local.
Absolutely. This is really us versus them. It's not left versus right anymore.
Yes.
We are so far beyond that.
Yeah.
Really.
And it's amazing and very heartening how many people that I know and I interview that we would have been against each other 15 years ago. We would say, you're, and now it's like, no, forget all of that.
Yeah.
And it's heartening that people are waking and starting to come together. Question is, do we make it fast enough? I've been saying for a while, this is going to be a photo finish. I don't know which one's going to.
I don't think anyone really does, and I think it comes down to how much responsibility people are willing to take for their own lives, and how far communities are willing to go to ensure that they're self-reliant in the face of what we're facing.
What does that mean to you?
Well, if the banks are deplatforming people, you can't use their financial system. Are you going to go to the CBDC land where eventually you won't be able to spend money without like a microchip in your hand and all of this stuff? There's obvious red lines people can't cross. How are you going to feed your family? How are you going to keep your house heated in winter? Basic needs. I think we should probably be taking some lessons from the Amish, to be honest. I think, I think they got a lot of stuff right.
That the Amish, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. We have outsourced everything.
Our needs to corporations that want to enslave us. So we have to start producing our own stuff at a local level. It's all about exit and build, and that's what we have to do. And the more people that do that, the better off we will be. The real question is how accustomed are Americans to convenience, and will we be enslaved by that convenience or not? And I think that's the ultimate.
So far we have been.
A lot of people have been.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about Bitcoin.
So I'm, not necessarily well versed on cryptocurrency. I do. I like Bitcoiners because we tend to see a lot in common about the state of government today and the Federal Reserve, for example, central bank digital currency, and all of that. But because I'm not particularly well versed in it, I don't like to tell people how to spend their money. It's a very individual decision.
Do you think it can survive?
I think the central banks, the bankers, and the government will do everything they can to prevent a currency that threatens their power from actually being able to be used. And I think we're already seeing major efforts to make that the case. They can make it illegal to, turn it into something else, illegal to use as tender. They're looking at a lot of different options. But, some Bitcoiners, despite that, think it's totally possible, but I don't think I'm qualified to talk about that. I personally have, in terms of my finances, some people donate to my work in crypto. I have a little bit of that, but, I'm personally looking at trying to put as much of my money as I can in things that will keep me and my family self-sufficient, come what may, which in my case included investing in land. So I'm not renting. I own where I live. I have enough land to produce what my family needs in terms of food, stocking up on things that I can't produce. Things like that. That's where my money is personally going. But I am not in the business of telling people, giving financial advice beyond that. Sure. But, if the goal is to develop parallel systems so we're not dependent on the systems of the people trying to enslave us, whatever you think is a good way to get from point A to point B, that's probably where your money should be going. If Bitcoin's a part of that, if you feel that way, good for you. And if not, good for you too. I think ultimately what we need to do is try and create something so that we can be resilient and not have to, because the system is just so unacceptable. It's really not just it's not just against freedom and all sorts of other values, right? It's against nature. It's against life, really. And so, if you're going to support that, I think people have to realize the consequences that come with that and exactly what it means when you are willing to give yourself over to that kind of system, the implications of that. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that or take the time to think about it. And I think they should.
Are you God-driven? Is God a center of you?
Yeah, but I tend to think of maybe God differently than most Christians. I don't really see it as a person or as a man. I see it as maybe the universe or the creative force,
right.
The energy that drives all life.
I can go with George Lucas and the Force.
Right.
It's the same
There's a lot of
principle.
different ways, to look at it. But ultimately, if you're looking at humanity, what do you like about humanity? It's the creativity. It's the vivaciousness. That's the stuff that I think we're fighting for. And a lot of the guys behind this want to eliminate that. I think a lot of transhumanism is aimed at creating a drone-like workforce that will never be able to challenge their working conditions or ask for a bigger piece of the pie. And it's amazing to me that more people on the left don't see that if they're all about workers' rights and unionizing. All right, you have a chip in your brain. How's workers' rights going to go?
And how are the unions in bed furthering all of this?
Well, I would say that you just have to look back to the unions, back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and how organized crime took them over. And that hasn't really changed. So the big ones, So it's, a lot of those guys over the years have evolved to support these types of policies because it's more control and money. And what does the mob love more than anything else, right?
Why is the left, I've always held more libertarian views. When it comes to social issues, I don't care who you marry. I don't care what you do. I don't care who you love. That's no business of mine. Shouldn't be any business of the government. That was a progressive idea to have a marriage license from the government. But we fought this, and I remember saying to my daughter, who was in college at the time, she said, "Dad, it's about love." And I said, "I don't think it is. I think it's about control." And this argument, if we play it out, you can't stop polygamy. You can't change one factor without changing other factors. And everyone said these things were crazy. We are now transitioning kids because there's no gender identity anymore. We are sexualizing our youngest kids. Where is that coming from? It's such a force.
If your ultimate goal is total control, you need to have a population that has no national identity, that has no identity, period. That identity can be fluxed and can be moved whenever convenient for the people on top. If people have an identity and know who they are and know where they stand, they're a lot harder to control. And I think if you make all of that fluid, at every level, it's a lot easier to exert your will over them because, they don't have their feet firmly on the ground, right?